morning. What an exciting worship service. Thank you for inviting my wife and I. You've seen us around campus a little bit. Stephen, Penny, Fulton. We travel. The school just took me on to go to churches to tell them all about what great kids you are and a great ministry is going on here at Mountain Mission School. And Ernie invited me to start off this sermon series today about the many names of God. And I'd like you to bow your heads just for a moment before I get started, and let's pray together. Lord, we thank you so very much that you are in our midst. And even as we just were singing and thinking about, you've walked through the door and you're the greatest celebrity of history. We thank you for your presence. I pray today as we look at one of your names in the Bible that we will have a greater sense of awe for who you are, and that awe would give us comfort, but it would also challenge us to be the very best people that you've made us to be. In Jesus' name, amen. There we go. Anybody studying English Lit right now or has studied English Lit? Anybody? What's in a name? William Shakespeare. Who can tell me which of his plays that was? Anybody? Romeo and Juliet. Now let's see. Do you know what the very next line is after that one? Juliet said, "What's in a name?" And then what did she say? There's a hint on the screen. A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet, she said. Names can be funny things. In fact, I've come across some names that I wondered how parents could possibly be so cruel to name their children what they did. Found some interesting ones online. Your last name is Banks. How would you like it if your mom and dad named you Robin? How about your last name is Clear and your mom and dad name you Loudon? Your last name is Druff and your mom and dad name you Dan. Bad, huh? Yeah. How about Case? Your last name is Case and they name you Justin. Or here's a really bad one. Your last name is Zaster and they name you Disaster. My dad came home laughing about a family that he met one time in a revival. The man's name was Jack Rabbit. That was his last name was Rabbit. His first name was Jack. He marries a woman named Bonnie. So guess what her nickname became? Bunny Rabbit, and Jack Rabbit. And they had a son. Believe it or not, they named him Peter Rabbit, son of Jack and Bunny Rabbit. I got to tell you two of my all-time favorites, though. We have a friend that runs a Sprint cell phone shop. And one day a lady came in there and was signing the contract. And this is the name that she wrote on the contract. Can you figure out what that one is? Ladasha. And that's exactly the way it was spelled. Ladasha. But the worst one of all. If your last name is Butt, you already got a problem, right? Well, how about if your mom and dad make it even worse and come along and name you Sandy Butt? We know a lady by that name, and she lives at the beach, so it's a great name, I guess, for her. But you know, in Bible times, parents did not give their kids names just to be cute or that they sound nice or anything like that. They had serious ramifications. They often had something very specific to say about that person or about the conditions of the times. Many of the names from the Bible that you know well. Abraham means father of nations. Isaac means laughter because Sarah laughed when God said, "You're going to have a son." Well, wait a minute, I'm 90 years old. That can't be it. She laughed. Jacob. When Jacob and Esau were born as twins, Esau came out first, and Jacob had a hold of his heel. So they named him Heel Holder, or Supplanter, or Trickster. And Esau, the older of the two twins, his name is Harry. And his nickname, Edom, means red. So maybe he was red-haired. I don't know. But the point is, when parents name their kids in the Bible, they meant something. In fact, all the names that you ever see in the Bible truly mean something. And just so, the names of God mean something very important. We're going to start a series today about the various names of God. And we're going to be looking at a lot of different names. And you've heard some of the various names of God. The very first name of God that we find in the Bible, Elohim, was right at creation. And then, I don't know, maybe this is before your time, years ago, Amy Grant made popular a song with many names of God. El Shaddai, Adonai, El Elyon. And all those names were names that were given to God by men, by human beings, because of the impression God had made on them as a great provider, as a great warrior, as a great creator, as a good and merciful God. And they would give God names because of that. But today, we're going to study the name that God gave himself. And you already sang it earlier. It's the name Yahweh. And it comes from the account in Exodus 3 where Moses was at the burning bush, as you remember. And God was explaining to Moses that he wanted Moses to go back to Egypt and deliver God's people from slavery. And Moses was coming up with all these excuses and hemming and hawing and being all upset that God would even suggest that he do that. And in verse 13, Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, well, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them?" And God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And this is what you are to say to the Israelites. "I am has sent me to you." God also said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, has sent me to you, and this is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation." There are so many directions that we could take a study of the name Yahweh, I am, but there's one particular direction I want to take it today regarding the significance of that name. And here's where I want to go with this. For God, all time is present tense. I am. I am. In fact, one of the most profound places in Scripture where Jesus alluded to the timelessness of God is in John, the 8th chapter. In John, the 8th chapter, Jesus was trying to explain to the Jewish leaders who he was, and they began to get upset with him. They said, "Who do you think you are?" And as he tried to tell them, at one point he said, "Abraham rejoiced to see the day that I would come," and that got them all upset. And they said, "Wait a minute. You're telling us you knew Abraham personally? You're not even 50 years old." And Jesus then made this statement. I'm telling you, before Abraham was even born, I am. Jesus said that of himself. And that really ticked him off because nobody used that name. Not I am, not Yahweh, except the true and living God. And that is precisely why Jesus said what he said to them. Now I want to get back to the question we had before, which is how is it that all time is present tense for God? Well, let's look at it this way. I have a nephew who lives in Australia. If I were to whip out my cell phone right now and call him in Australia from Grundy, it's 11 or so here. And it's already tomorrow morning in Australia, and yet we're talking to each other at the same time. How can that be? It's because the whole concept of time is tied to location. Everything about what we call time is driven by where we are at that moment. It's already tomorrow morning for my nephew. And in fact, I've read that at a theoretical place up on the North Pole, if you're in just the right place, you can step into tomorrow morning and back into today. Isn't that amazing? It's because of where you are. And really blowing my mind is thinking, let's expand on that idea, and where I am in the universe even says what year it is, or what century it is, or what era it is for me. And so, if you, as God is, are everywhere, what time is it? It's the present tense. I am. Now, that has to lead to a question. What does all this mean for me, serving the God named I am? Well, here's one thing it means. I should take a lot of comfort if He is my God, because He knows what He's doing. Everything is present tense for Him. He's not waiting on anything. Things are not over for Him. Things are not surprising Him. They're all going on at the same time for Him. He knows what He's doing. And to really illustrate this, I want to give you a little history lesson. You all love history class, right? I heard that. You're going to love this history lesson because of how much it has to do with you. And this history lesson comes from some details we find out about Paul in Acts 16, 22, and 25. And one of the details that we find out there is that Paul was born a Roman citizen. Now, why is that important? Because many times in Paul's ministry, it was the fact that he was a Roman citizen that kept him from being severely flogged and even killed in some cases. In fact, in Acts 25, he finally even appealed to Caesar because it looked like his days were probably going to be over. And the reason that's important for you and for me is, how did the Christian message come across the ocean to the United States? Or any place outside of Judea? It primarily happened because the Apostle Paul went into Asia Minor and went into Europe, and the European and the Western civilization cultures came over to us, and any of us who know Jesus would not know it if it hadn't have been for the Apostle Paul, and in some respects, his being a Roman citizen. Okay, now I've tried to establish the importance of him being a Roman citizen, but here's the history lesson that I want to tell you. You remember this line from another play? Do you remember what play that one was? Julius Caesar. Good. We've got some sharp people out there. Julius Caesar. And I'm going to take you back to 42 BC. Et tu, Brute, was in Shakespeare's play when Brutus, the nephew of Caesar, literally stabbed him in the back. And Julius Caesar said, "You too, Brutus?" That's what that is in Latin. You too are betraying me? In in BC 42, when Julius Caesar was killed, that left a huge power struggle in the Roman Empire. Brutus versus a guy by the name of Octavius. Now, I want you to stay with me. I know this is history, so stay with me. Say that with me a minute. Brutus versus Octavius. Ready? Say it. Brutus versus Octavius. They're fighting over what Julius Caesar left behind. And it did not go well for Brutus. In fact, at one point, Brutus fled to the city of Tarsus. And he was trying to compel the people of Tarsus to harbor him, to protect him, to give him a place to stay safely. But they all remained loyal to Octavius. Remember, Brutus versus Octavius. And Octavius ended up winning the war. Octavius rewarded the citizens of Tarsus. They had to be citizens, but if they were citizens of Tarsus, he rewarded them with Roman citizenship, which carried all kinds of privileges, the ones I was just talking about that protected Paul. Now, there's got to be a question that comes to your mind, and that is, if Paul's great-granddaddy, who got the Roman citizenship at that time, was in Tarsus, how did he end up in Tarsus? I mean, he's a Jew. He's from Judea. Well, to explain that one, we're going to go back. Here's where we just were. Octavius gave Roman citizenship to Paul. But if you go back, all the way back to Paul's great-great-great-granddaddy, the King Antiochus, those of you that remember your history, the Seleucid Empire, which was one of the parts left over after Alexander the Great, Antiochus forced a bunch of Jews to move to Tarsus because he was trying to turn Tarsus into one of his best garrisons, and he needed to up the population, and he needed a workforce there. So Paul's great-great-great-granddaddy was uprooted out of Judea and forced to go to Tarsus. But because those people did go there and work, they were rewarded citizenship in the town of Tarsus, even though they were Jews. All right. You see what's happening here? 4 generations before Paul, his great-great-great-granddaddy is made to go to Tarsus. But he's rewarded with citizenship of Tarsus for that. And then later, Paul's great-granddaddy, as a citizen of Tarsus, is given Roman citizenship. Now, what does all that mean for you and for me? Well, let me ask you this question. Do you think Paul's great-great-great-granddaddy and grandma were very happy about getting forced out of their homeland? Of course not. But look what God was working out. Because he's I am. And it's all happening at the same time for him. It'd be great to have a friend that knows how to time travel. Huh? Well, God's even better than that. He's there now and here now. And 1,000 years ago now. He's the best friend you could ever have. Man, having a friend that can time travel, think what you could do with, betting on football games and all that kind of thing. But God is way better than that because he's I am. And what I'm trying to say to you is you should take comfort in knowing that the God you serve knows what he's doing. He is working all things together for good. To what? 2 qualifications of people. They love him, but they're also called according to his purpose. In other words, they love him so much that his agenda is their agenda. And if we meet those criteria, we love him so much that his purpose is what drives us. He's working all things together for good. And Paul's Roman citizenship, centuries later, made a huge difference for you and for me. And it wouldn't have happened without I am. Think of it this way. This is an imagery that just struck me this past week. It works for me. I hope it works for you. Think of God as a great maestro conductor who is conducting an orchestra called history. And each of those musicians might represent a year. And each of those sections might represent an era of time. They're all a part of the same orchestra called history, but they can't see or hear each other. But the maestro does. He's conducting the whole thing because everything's simultaneous for him. And it's making wonderful music. And it's building to a crescendo when Jesus comes back. And it's the end of what? Time. Why? New location. new location, no longer earthbound. The fact that we serve a God named I Am should give us terrific comfort because He knows what He's doing. Well, there's one other thing that serving a God named I Am should also do, and that is not only that we take great comfort, but we take up a great challenge. Because present tense, I like to call them nows, are so important to God, and they're where He lives. Our nows should be important to the service of Him and to the sacrifice that we make to Him. And there are some great things that happen to us if we will start valuing our nows more every day. The first thing that will happen is a very practical thing. And my wife is probably going to roll her eyes because this is a bugaboo of mine. But when you use your nows wisely, you will find order that comes to your life. Ephesians 5:15 and 16 says, be careful how you live your life. Don't live it as wise people, not as unwise people. And then he goes on to say, make the most of every opportunity. In other words, all your nows, every time you get a now, make the most of it. Don't live stupidly, live wisely, make the most of all your nows. Let me tell you how that works in life. Have you ever asked yourself the question, maybe not out loud, but have you asked yourself the question, how does life get so complicated? How does life get so complicated? Well, some of it is not in your control at all. But you know what? A lot of it is. A lot of it is in your control, and it has a lot to do with what you do with your nows. For instance, let me tell you a story. Before I started traveling for Mountain Mission School, I had a job that required me to go out to a lot of people's homes and meet with them. And sometimes it was a pretty rotten situation. I'll never forget one place that I went. As soon as I walked in the door, this horrendous stench practically knocked me to the floor. The lady was still in her nightshirt. All over the whole house, on every flat surface, was trash. Piles of papers, McDonald's bags, you name it. And she started apologizing for the smell and said, we think we have a mouse. It wasn't a mouse. Do you know what it was? I looked around that house. There had to have been 50 dirty diapers just laying everywhere. Oh. And you know how that happened? It happened one now at a time. She changed her baby. She had a dirty diaper. And she went, later. You follow me? What we do with our nows has a lot to do with the order in our lives. That's just how it works. Let me give you an example that's a little closer to home. And you folks that are on the staff will identify with this maybe a little more than the kids. Let's say you've got a big day tomorrow and you really need to get up early. You're tired, and you figure when I go to bed, I'll set the alarm clock because I need to make sure that I get up. Well, you mosey into the living room and you turn the television on and you fall asleep in the lazy boy. You had a now, setting the alarm right then when you thought of it, and you didn't do it, and you fell asleep. And the next morning, with no alarm, you wake up late. You rush to get dressed. You don't have any clean clothes. You had a now the other day to wash your clothes, but you said, later. And now you're having to put on dirty clothes. And you rush around and you're looking for your keys. And you can't find your keys. Why? Because when the little now came along, when you walked in from work last night and said, hang your keys on the hook so you can find them, you just mindlessly dropped them and now you can't find them. And then you finally get them and you get out to your car and there's no gas. You had a now last night on the way home from work to get gas, but you were tired and you said, later. Do you see what I'm talking about? Sometimes we create our own chaos. And even the very quality of our physical lives is improved if we make more use. If we do what Ephesians 5:15 and 16 says, don't live stupidly. Make the most of every opportunity, every now that God gives you. If you will use it wisely, it's going to make your life more ordered. Well, there's another thing it's going to do. God sends us nows all the time in which we have a chance to be a blessing to others. Hebrews 3 says, while it is called today, encourage one another. Let me ask you a question. How many days get to be called today? How many days get to go by the name today? Does tomorrow get to go by that name? No. Does yesterday get to go by that name? None of the yesterdays and none of the tomorrows. The only day that gets to be called today is this one. And that's what the Hebrew writer was saying in a rather clever way. Why don't we call it today? Encourage one another. Let me tell you, in the traveling I've been doing, I brag on you guys a lot about that. I've been all over Virginia, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. Ask my wife. She's sitting back there. Everywhere I go, I say, folks, you've got to come to Mount